I was particularly incensed.
Yes, and you wrote about it.
And I wrote about it.
And you're still alive.
And I'm still here.
Good morning, or is it afternoon yet?
I think it's afternoon.
We're on the cusp, whatever it is. I'm pleased to introduce Rick Jones today. He's a friend of medium long standing, and a really interesting guy. He's spent a whole career as a banker in Orange County, I believe, for the most part, and then came to Ulster County, and is now chairman of the Rochester Planning Board.
Yes, that's right.
As well as a member of the Industrial Development Agency.
Here in Ulster, yeah.
But the most interesting thing is that you take a day off every week to go down to some volunteer work that you do.
I do.
Tell me about that.
I take a day a week. I go down to the Bronx, down to the New York Botanical Gardens, right across the street from my alma mater of Fordham University. And I spend a day down there doing some work in the horticultural office. But even more interestingly, and so much fun, is doing tours, public tours, either inside the conservatory or outside. Even in the wintertime, I was there last week in the midst of the cold weather, and it was wonderful.
Mostly kids take the tours?
No, although we do get kids sometimes. Mostly adults. What we call drop-in tour from people who are coming to the gardens for a day, and we announce what the tours are. Have signs up all over the place, and I give them a tour. It could be anywhere from 2 or 3 people. I've had as many as 20, 25 people. And it's my special place, if you would. It's a fun place to be.
Yeah. Well, it's such a different occupation, but you've been doing different occupations all your life.
Well, as you mentioned, I spent 41 years in banking, about 10 years in Orange County, and the other 31 years down in the city, down in New York. And at one time, I was even in Texas. I was spending a lot of time in Texas.
I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah, for Chase, when I worked for Chase. I have a long history of banks that were acquired, and I worked for many of them. Manufacturers, Hanover, Chemical, Chase, and then J.P. Morgan Chase. So when I decided to retire, and did retire back in 2004 from Chase, I went to then Sterling Bank, what is now Sterling Bank. It was Provident Bank. I decided to pick up a different career, if you would, and I went back to school for botany and horticulture. And I got degrees in that. Didn't want to practice it except in my own garden, and decided I could have a lot of fun and do a lot of good by just being a tour guide at the gardens.
That's interesting. I have some similar experience. My parents were first generation people coming to America. When they were here, they sold Stanley Home Products, they sold Electrolux, they sold pots and pans.
Oh my goodness.
And my father got a PhD from Brown University in Russian literature.
Wow.
At the age of 65.
Wow.
And taught at a couple of colleges. And my mother became a lawyer, one of whose proudest accomplishments was beating the guy who just retired from the Supreme Court in a case in Boston.
Stephen Breyer?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Wow. That's wild. I wonder if I lived in the city for a long time. I grew up in Jamaica, in Queens. And I can remember the Electrolux person coming to the door, or the Fuller Brush man coming to the door. But I decided it was time to go back to school, and I did. And I do a little teaching also. 2 years I taught at Newport's, and 1 semester over in at Bard. And it's a program called Lifetime Learning Institute. It's usually for people who are retired, and they want to pick up courses in any number of different areas. So I offered a course called Botany for Non-Botanists. So I taught that.
Well, some people, have said in recent years that if you are in one career, it's hard to stay there all your life because the change is so ubiquitous.
Yeah.
And that maybe it's better to be kind of broadly educated at the beginning rather than over specialized.
I would agree with that.
Things.
Yeah, I got a very broad education at Fordham University, basically liberal arts, but a lot of science, a lot of history, philosophy, theology, the whole 9 yards.
Oh boy!
A lot of literature. So it was a libertarian, if you would, or a liberal education, academic education. Yeah, and if I had, how you say, if you had to do it all over again, were there other things that I would have liked to have done? Sure.
Well, that connects.
And I finally did
you said
do it.
Liberal and libertarian, and those are usually considered opposite politically. But it really describes what Catholic education is like. My mother, here we go again, went to Boston College Law School, and the dean was Father Drinan, who became a congressman. So she was, quite proud of that. There's this picture I have of 34 guys in black suits and my mother, the graduates of 1 year.
It's interesting you should say liberal and libertarian. They are at the opposite ends. But I think even when I went back in the 60s to Fordham, there was a wide range of ability for a wide range of people with different views, political views, to enjoy themselves there and to get something out of the experience.
Yeah.
Way on the left and way on the right. I like to say that I'm usually in the middle.
Maybe it's not just, a one wing and the other, but a kind of a circle. That is, I'm pretty liberal, and the thing I agree on with conservatives is libertarian things, usually. Yeah.
I think what's important in education, from my perspective, is to be open to different ideas, even if immediately it doesn't ring true to you, but to explore it, to listen, and to do so in such a way that maybe you change your mind. Maybe you learn something new.
It teaches you one thing. It teaches you tolerance,
a
respect for the other person, even when you feel opposite. I hate these people who are so self-righteous about everything that they couldn't possibly be wrong.
Right.
And they're everywhere on the political spectrum.
It makes it difficult to have a discourse. You don't want to talk with people that are always, before they even start talking or you start talking, they think they have the answers to everything. It makes it real difficult to share ideas.
Yeah.
Really difficult. It's distressing.
Now, tell me, I know very little about your life on the planning board. How long have you been on? What's it like? Is there much going on these days? I assume there is.
Yeah, there's a lot going on. When I came up to Ulster in 2015, I had served on the planning board in Orange County, the planning board in the town of Monroe. When I came up, I applied for the planning board for the town of Rochester. So I've been there since 2015, 7 years. And I just became the chairman of it. The existing previous chair, is still on the board, but she wanted to take a step back. Mm-hmm. It's a lot of work. And she had put a lot of work into it. And so, I was it. And it is
sounds
busy.
Sounds like the usual route, doesn't it?
Yeah, it wasn't planned. There you go, planning board. It wasn't planned that I would take up the mantle of being the chair, but I became the chair. And it's been busy.
What's the most important or interesting project you have facing the planning board these days?
That's a good question. Right now, there's actually a project. It's a mixed use. I won't mention the name, but it's a mixed use project, combination of business, commercial, as well as residential, and small. But it's challenging to combine both in such a way that it works on the piece of property. So the applicant is wonderful, very flexible, wants to get done what they want to get done, but very flexible to understanding that there are certain codes that we have that they have to ascribe to. And so it's working very well.
Well, there was somebody, an architect or a restaurateur, Is that the one you were referring to?
No,
No.
no.
Okay,
no,
good.
that's another one.
That's another one. Yeah.
That's another one. We had one recently that was interesting. It was a small abandoned store, if you would, in the middle of Accord, or Accord, depending upon how you want to pronounce it, right across the street from the fire district, the fire station in Accord. And anyway, he wanted to open up a small coffee place, combination coffee, and a small grocery store. And there were certain challenges around just the availability of water, parking, those kind of things. But we were able to work it out. It took a while.
Uh-huh.
Some weeping and gnashing of teeth, if you would, but we got it done, and it's interesting. It's alive and well, and it's helping to bring the little hamlet of Accord back to some semblance of vibrancy. And there's another one coming down the road in Accord that we're looking forward to. That'll add to the vibe, if you would, in Accord.
Now, I noticed that for many planning boards, the applicants are people from the city with money, and they come up here, and they get used to what it's like, and that's a kind of interesting process. It's kind of like a dance, because the old timers are sitting there, and they just kind of, people don't want to see much change anymore, those folks from the city. And here you come from the city and you're proposing changes.
Yeah, it's understandable.
It takes a while.
When I moved up here in 2015, I think I felt very comfortable. I enjoyed being part of the town of Rochester, which has been around for 350 years,
Yeah.
long time. And I can understand people coming up from the city who have different ideas as to what they can do, should do, and how quickly they can do it. And I find myself not holding the line, but explaining, but you don't understand. Things are done a little bit differently here.
Yeah.
Here's the code. Here's what we'd like to see. Really want to protect our resources, be they water, animal life, plant life, a whole host of things. So it's an interesting dance between the applicants from the city and the people who are living here now. One of the remarkable things that I learned from one of the older families, if you would, they were expressing some appreciation of the fact that there were, even if they were weekenders, there were people from the city coming up. Somebody had done a study at one time as to where the tax dollars were coming from in the town of Rochester. And at least half of the tax dollars were coming from transplants, or weekenders who were paying taxes on their weekend home, or 3-day a week, or pandemic homes, which people were living in far longer than just a weekend. They were here for quite a bit of time. So it's interesting. Some of the vibrancy of the area, if you would, vibrancy of the area, need to have money to do things.
Yeah.
And it's coming from some of the transplants.
When you mentioned, pandemic homes, that's a phrase that came up. Yeah, that's interesting. That lacks some of the usual permanence that one feels in terms of, and it's more like the change that's happening in society anyway. People are more mobile. They live more where they want. And when there's enough of them that make that change at the same time, it changes the world.
It does. I can see it with my 3 boys, particularly the last one, Patrick, who is 32, 33, and very flexible as to what he works at, how often he changes his job, and where he lives. And he's real comfortable with working from home. He'd probably be comfortable living in Rochester and working from someplace in Rochester. A little bit different from myself, how I was raised and what I did in my career, looking for a little bit more permanence. And I think the other 2 boys are somewhere in between, permanence and flexibility to move different places.
I once did a look at a study on where a person lives and where they work. And there's a very small minority of population that live around here and work in California. L.A. mostly,
Go figure.
Some in San
Go
Francisco,
figure,
but
yeah.
L.A. Yeah, and you can just imagine, this lifestyle going back and forth instead
Yeah.
of driving up the thruway. You take
Yeah.
a plane and you read a book.
That's interesting. When I worked for Chase, my boss was from Texas, and she used to fly up every Sunday, Saturday or Sunday, and then fly back to Texas on Thursday
Mm-hmm.
and work from Texas on a Friday. So she was an itinerant executive vice president. It was interesting. They allowed her to do it. And she was excellent, and I'm glad they allowed her to do it. Had a big family and just didn't want to make the move to New York City.
Well, now they're using the word hybrid.
Yes,
to
hybrid working.
Yeah, so you're not
Yeah,
either exclusively at one or the other, but you do
Right.
some of each.
right.
And I wouldn't be surprised if that became the majority pattern. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if the 4-day week eventually came about.
Yeah. I see that happening, the 4-day week. What I also see happening in a place like Rochester is trying to create jobs, just in Ulster County, trying to create jobs for people who are not going to be going to the city, who want to work here, and finding the opportunity for them to have those jobs. That's one of the interesting things about working for the IDA, or working with the IDA as a volunteer. And the primary purpose of the IDA is the creation of jobs, and good-paying jobs. And I think we've done a halfway decent job, and I think there's a lot of room for improvement. Looking forward to Tech City, coming to a point where something finally happens at Tech City that creates some good-paying jobs.
Yeah, I'm impressed by the developer of that. I think that they're pretty savvy people and not narrow in their thinking.
Well, he has a track record.
Yeah.
Right down in Dutchess County, and also did some work, I think, in Connecticut.
Yeah.
But he has a track record, which is great. The county is doing real well in being flexible and offering him the opportunity to do something there. I congratulate the county executive and all the people around him for moving on it. It sat there for just a long period of time.
Now, I sometimes think that there are few institutions as roundly reviled as the IDA.
I think you're right.
And there's a disconnect there because, you describe it, and I've experienced it as doing some good, but people are very suspicious, and people are very concerned about other people's motives and possible profitability.
Everybody has a range of motives. And there's a natural tendency to say, well, they're not paying full taxes. That's not fair. Meanwhile, perhaps the site, there's no taxes being paid. And at least if it qualifies, this is a way of getting it back on the tax rolls and doing it over time. So while at the same time you're giving a tax inducement to whoever the builder is or the developer is, you're building it back up to be fully taxed eventually. There's always one or two projects that create real angst, like the Kingstonian.
Well, let's turn to the Kingstonian. Maybe we'll reserve a few sentences for the Kia.
Okay, great.
So here, the Kingstonian, I think it deserved a break, but I don't think it was as large. It should have been as large as it was. I thought, somewhere what the county executive had talked about, something like 60% of what they had asked for, 70% would be more reasonable, because on such a long term, 15, 20 years, it's a lot.
I think
it's a lot of money and a lot of clearly speculation and risk.
There's a lot of risk.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people, the people involved in it, that there's real risk to them. Mm-hmm. They're putting up a lot of their own money. Of course, they're putting up banks' money too, but eventually they need to pay that back. And they're asking the community to take a risk as well.
Right.
I think what brought me over the top in terms of approving it was the possibility of seeing the parking revitalized. When I first saw the project, I was convinced that the city ought to be able to do the parking themselves. That's what cities do. And that perhaps the building there, the old hotel, could be developed as a hotel for affordable housing, or something of that sort.
Yeah.
And I became unconvinced after going through the numbers on the parking garage and the ability for the city to actually put it all together. Now, there's always a way of skinning a cat, if you would. Maybe there was no desire to get involved in it. The city had run the garage, and it didn't work out very well for them. It wasn't maintained properly. But it became apparent that this might be a last gambit to get that garage built and to have the amenities of a hotel and retail in that area. The flip side, that property, the old hotel property, would have been bought by somebody, no doubt.
Yeah.
And God only knows, would they have asked for some sort of inducement, and or would they have developed it along the lines of what the populace would have expected. Just to be a little bit, not snarky, but questioning, I understand the concern with the Kingstonian. Flip side is, there's a real concern on my part, as well as other people's part, about the developer who has bought up a lot of the property in Kingston proper, and it's empty, as he tries to drive up the price of that property, of that retail space.
Right.
What if that person had bought the hotel? Would that have been good for Kingston? So, sometimes a bird in the hand is better than two birds in the bush, and this seemed like a good solution to a building that had laid fallow for a long time, the hotel, as well as to develop a new parking garage and the amenities that will go with it.
Well, I think it seems that it's going to go. The only part that's left is really the site plan, and that's where I think that Fair Street extension is important, because it's a space between the two buildings, and you want something that connects to the plaza on the one hand, but also doesn't do injustice to, say, the Senate House or something like that area. So it has to have some character, and I don't know. There are some better people working on it now, but I really hope they come up with something. Well,
I like the last architectural renderings. They're far better than the ones that we had seen before. And now it's really up to the city to move it forward. The IDA has done its job. It's the Senate building. They have events there from time to time. They need parking to have those events.
Yeah.
They need a place if people want to stay over after a wedding or an event or something. The Kingstonian will offer some space to do that. Of course, there's other hotels in town, boutique hotels that are being developed. So hopefully it'll all work together.
Okay,
it'll all work together.
I share with you that hope.
Yeah.
And I myself have thought that it could work, and I wanted to, in little ways, find a way of making it better.
Yeah. I hope so.
All right, now the Kia.
Oh, who's Kia? Oh, Kia Motors. Yeah, that was interesting.
I borrowed my wife's car, which happens to be a Kia, to go down to Stewart Airport. So
they're nice cars.
Kia on my mind,
and they're getting better and better.
Yeah.
So, not to give a lot of the background, but Kia came to us looking for an inducement. Their project was going to be out there on Ulster Avenue, across from their other site. Their other site did not get an inducement way back, 5 years ago, the Buick site. They didn't ask for it. And there's no other car dealership that has ever gotten an IDA inducement.
Right.
The reason why this one qualified was it was in what's called an economically depressed area. And by the state statute, they're allowed to at least put their best foot forward and say, we qualify based on that, and other reasons, jobs, So after we looked at it, they qualified. They were doubling the number of jobs. They were doubling or tripling the size of their sales room. The sales tax that would come from that over time would be significant. We wouldn't have given it to them had they been out by the other car dealerships over by the Thruway, because it wouldn't have qualified in terms of a location. Retail typically doesn't qualify for an IDA inducement, except if it's in a particular kind of area, an economically depressed area. So, lo and behold, as you know, we approved it. That kind of a application where it's retail needs to be approved by the county exec. But the wording in the code is he needs to confirm the staffing numbers or the job numbers. It's very explicit. Needs to confirm the job numbers. We doubled the number of jobs with the new site, the site we gave the inducement to. And instead what was done, he decided that he was going to decline to sign. We held that, that's not what the code says. It's very explicit. And in the midst of that was a little bit of a brouhaha around, as you probably know,
yes,
around who controls the IDA.
Yes.
My preference is the IDA stay independent, so we're not influenced by politicians or friends of politicians. The county executive wanted more control over the IDA. Right. So, unfortunately, he used the signature on the piece of paper for Kia as a quid pro quo to us agreeing to become again part of the county extension of the county government as it was previously. And we said no.
Well, that's one of those stories that's so good I haven't touched it yet. It's really interesting because Pat Ryan has done some very good things, only you and I originally met because I disagreed with the Hine administration that they should control you, as you know.
Yeah.
And was
and
quite
you were quite
clearly on your side.
And we actively worked to unbundle ourselves from the county and to be independent.
Yeah, and now this came along, and I still feel you should be independent.
Yeah.
And I think that was dirty pool when he tried.
Well, I was a wee bit, as was the board, but I was particularly incensed.
Yes, and you wrote about it.
And I wrote about it.
And you're still alive.
And I'm still here. And Pat's still county exec. He's doing good work, but I was incensed by how that came about or what happened.
Well, I've told some of his people that you're a good guy. That I don't.
Well, I appreciate that, Betty.
Sure.
You're a good guy, too.
I don't think that it was...
Listen, I look forward to working with his administration on other projects. On this one, it was... I was incensed by the lack of sensitivity.
And I agree that you shouldn't be controlled by them. That if he wants to improve the board, he could improve it by appointing people he think more like he does. But I'm not exactly.
Well, see, he doesn't get to appoint anybody. It's all done by the legislature. Right now, of course, he could twist arms and all that. That happens all the time, and that's fine. I understand. What I was most incensed about was you had a third party in the middle of this debate about who should control the IDA, namely Kia Motors, kind of an innocent bystander, and they shouldn't be disenfranchised from what they, in my opinion, were legally entitled to. Shouldn't be disenfranchised by a political debate between the IDA and the county executive's office.
Now you mentioned in kind of introducing yourself, or not a little later, is that the people at Tech City, I-87, Park I-87.
Park I-87,
were going to probably need some help if they brought in some jobs, and that quite possibly could work out to the benefit of the community. And that in its scale, it's a huge opportunity.
Well, they've already gotten a lot of help, right? The county was showed a lot of largesse in terms of
Yep.
waiving some of the taxes and taking for the purchase price or for the ability to move it off from unpaid taxes to now they're in good stead in terms of their taxes.
Mm-hmm.
The county was very flexible in what they did for that entity.
Well, they figured it was like breaking the Gordian knot. You had
exactly. Somebody had to do something.
Had to do it.
So that was a good move on the part of the county. And the applicant realized that and pledged a great deal of money from investors. So if they should come to the IDA, I'm hoping they'll also be able to divulge to us, well, how much of your own money / investors' money are you putting on the table?
Mm-hmm.
This is not going to be all done with inducements from the IDA. There might be areas that we can help in, depending upon the nature of the project. We could certainly do mortgage tax inducements or sales tax inducement. But hey, where are your investors? And he's shown the ability to gather investors with tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars at their beck and call, and that would be good. So it would be a partnership as opposed to a one-way project built with all tax inducements.
And I think they've emphasized that they need a partnership with the local government and people in order to make it work.
We want to stay independent, but clearly we can be very effective in working with the Office of Economic Development and helping them to develop the economy here in Ulster County. That's what the IDA is for.
One of my first, if not the first, podcasts I did was with Tim Wiedemann.
Okay.
And Tim said, notably, I've never threatened anyone in my life. He said that the county exec can speak for himself, but he was kind of put aside that he played more the rabbit than the eagle. So
politics is interesting, isn't it?
Isn't it?
That's on the planning board and in the IDA. Of course, there's politics. And you just try to make sure that everything is done in front of the public, in the light of the public, so they can see what's going on, and avoid any kind of encumbrances on the part of people asking for favors.
Mm-hmm.
It's not. 41 years in banking taught me that it's not the way to go. Everything's above board, should be above board, and professional.
Well, it's really interesting to see you in so many. You have so many cards in your hand.
Yes.
Not just the one, and that makes for an interesting person, if nothing else.
It's interesting. I get to meet a lot of interesting people, get a lot of new ideas, new ways of looking at things.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the charms of journalism. Maybe that shares it with banking. People coming to you with various motives and interests.
Yep.
And you try to deal with them in a way that is honorable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Well, thank you very much, Rick. I appreciate your coming
Getty.
by.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure. You're
a
terrific.
For me, believe me.
I was telling somebody said, "Well, who are you doing a podcast with?" I said, "Well, this guy Getty with a name that I still can't pronounce, last name I can't pronounce." I said, "He's a great guy. He's an everyman or a Renaissance man who has had his fingers in a lot of different things. So it's always a pleasure to talk to you and get together and share ideas."
When I became convinced in my youth that there was very little call for déclassé Lithuanian aristocrats, I decided a new life was necessary.
Well, I'm glad you're here.
I'm glad you're here too. We're enjoying our old age, if nothing else.
There you go. Two old guys regaling each other with stories. You have another couple of hours. But it's been fun. Thank you.